Hello everybody, Randy Richard in the shop. And today in Fusion 360, I'm going to talk about the infamous rule number one. This will be my opinion on it. And if you visit the Fusion website or Fusion forums, I should say, with Autodesk, you'll see it mentioned in several locations about rule number one. And rule number one is basically a structure ideal. Uh, and I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of a home shop guy that uses Fusion as a tool in my shop. I use it a lot. And it can be very helpful, and so you don't make mistakes on projects, you don't waste material and things like that. It's just a tool, and that's how everybody should think about it. But it's not just a tool in making things, it's a tool for development of things. You can express your ideas. But rule number one, I'm gonna try to demonstrate this to you in a little bit different fashion that all these other Fusion guys that or modeling people on YouTube that have demonstrated. I've watched several, and I'm going to try to do this in a little different way to make it maybe a little more understandable to the home shop guy or the guy who doesn't do a lot of modeling. Now, not to say that this is not just for the home shop person. There's quite a few people who do CNC work that are learning Fusion or are familiar with Fusion that are watching my videos. So maybe it will help a lot more people. So on screen here, I have Fusion, of course, started it, and I'm in my large project folder. Now, things in this folder are things I don't usually share, type of thing. I have a lot of other project folders. If you go to my project folders, and a lot of this stuff I do share. So let's go over here, and we're going to go to this drill grinder folder, and so I'm going to first show you one project that I did, and I'm going to show you the structure of how I did it. It may not be the smartest way. It's kind of a way that I don't mind doing things because it is a little bit more work in a sense, but it sure helps control file size and moving files, and if something gets screwed up, like computers do, uh, and things calculate a little faster, especially when using a slower computer. Now, one thing I've done is I've upgraded my computer here to Fusion. I'm now recording here now in the shop on these. All the other were in the house on my laptop, and this is actually a faster computer. And only thing I have on it is Fusion and the software here to record off the computer, and that's it. So this computer is a lot quicker, and it seems to be a little bit better here to do Fusion on. So I'm going to try to do more of this on this computer. But anyway, on this computer, what I did is this is my Derek's drill grinder. I modeled the parts for, and I made parts for, right? If you watched all the build videos on that, I only showed some of the Fusion. I didn't show how to do the Fusion or anything like that, but I actually built these parts. The way I did this, though, is I built separate files and small subassemblies to help control the file size, because things are slow for me. I have, on my internet, it's not that fast and everything. So this is like one part, right? And this one part, it does have a few things. It has some screws on it, so it's actually in the strap. It's actually several parts in a way, but it's just a few. It's not a lot of parts, right? And so it's very controllable and easily manipulated and changed and such. And that's how most things you're going to do in your home shop. It's probably going to be just a few parts. These are all components. This was the fixture here is one component, and then each screw, of course, is a component as I took them out of McMaster, and then the end strap is a separate component. Okay. And for this one little part, that's a nice way to do this. Your history will be you select one of your parts here, you'll see, and it will have its history of building it and such, all contained within the componentry. Okay, and that this is a pretty much a good way to do this. Now this one didn't have the parts. The sketches, probably because I screwed up, are all up in here. But it's a small part, and this is also okay. It's easy to understand. I can come back to this and I can figure this out pretty quickly of how I built this or how I modeled it if I wanted to change things. And what I did then is I made these smaller sub-assemblies like this one here. This is another sub-assembly that actually exists on the machine. And I drew the grinding wheel in, and I drew all of this. I modeled all this up so I knew how all this would function and how it turns and slides and all that. But this is just a sub-assembly, and it has a bunch of parts. Again, I probably screwed this up, and I have a lot of sketches in the base of it, and then I made the components. I should have made the components first to align with rule number 1. And these are all, like I said, these are all components. And then I made a full assembly model, which I brought the sub-assemblies all together. And there's the full assembly. And all these things, of course, let's see here. These do move. I don't have these very well set for limits on this one, but they swing, they move, and you'll see here there's only 2 components in here, and these are also assembly. These are assemblies, or I should say sub-assemblies to this drawing. So in a way this is a little bit confusing, but if you change one part, I can then update this and it will change it in this whole picture here. But my file size is not huge and things update fairly quickly, which is a good thing for slower computers. But I did not really follow rule number 1 in all this. So I'm going to close that. I just wanted to show you this. Maybe this is not a way to do it. Now we're going to back up here, and what I really want to show, I'm going to show here is this was to demonstrate this a little bit better. Will be the drill grinder, the Lyle 91000. Now, a viewer, Cape Cod CNC, was able to obtain actual drawings of these parts for the drill holder part of it from Lyle. And to make the castings, this is no longer in production, and they were evidently more than willing to give this up. Well, he asked me if I could help him do the modeling so we could have these in the computer type of thing, and I don't know if he's going to CNC them or what, but he sent me the drawings and I worked on these. Now this took me a while to do. These are simple parts here, you'll see here. These are I did this in this kind of the same fashion where I drew a part and then that is the component. It's only one part. This is a casting, I should say. It has draft. I only put divots for the hole and things like that. But these are all separate parts. And you'll see here how I did not make a component to capture this. This is the component. So when you're drawing a single part, there's really no need to follow like rule number 1. It is the component. So that's what I did on this one also, where I drew each part as a separate piece. This is the whole assembly, I do believe. And here I brought in each component and put them together into an assembly drawing again. Okay. That is still missing a piece, but I don't know why it's not on there. Anyway, this piece here is extremely complicated. It took me over a month to figure this one out, really. And let's go over to the bench and let's talk about why and how rule number one works. This is the drill holder assembly, right? That I'm going to show you on the computer a little bit of. Now, just a little bit of credit here. So Cape Cod CNC is the one who's asked me to help him out here and model these up. I guess he has one of these grinders and he wants to actually cast the parts. Anyway, this piece here, I was having extreme difficulty from the drawings, getting a concept of what they were, how to do it just from the drawings itself. I think they could have done a little better job on their drawing. But anyway, Mr. Pete 222, I contacted Lyle and asked him if he would send me this so I could actually model from the real thing. So he was kind enough to send me this whole assembly and for me to model from. I just thank you, Lyle, for doing that, of course, and this is it was quite the project here. Anyway, so let's talk about rule number one. So this is basically an assembly of many parts, and if I'm going to start off in the design process of this assembly, how would you do it? And this is about, like I said, this is about the rule number one, is how would you approach and how would you want to have it organized in the modeling process. Now, there's a lot of parts here, so we'll just kind of take them apart. This is an end stop, and this is a support along the way, and this is even made up of several parts, here, and the thumb screw, the handle, the set screw, the threaded portion, and this piece here. So, right here alone, this has 4 parts to it, right? You could set all these apart. This here alone has 1, 2, 3, 4, and a little rod. 5. This has 5 parts. And then there's this piece here that comes off of here, and this has two parts, and then, not counting the fastener and the washers. And then this here alone, this here has more parts. I won't disassemble the entire thing because some have pins and how it's all set together. We got a couple washers and a spring and the rod, and then this is actually has a pivot pin that's in here and a pivot pin here. And then this part here, this has a slider part, some small screws, and a screw here, and this is a pin, and this is pivoted on the pin, this little piece here. So we have lots of parts here. Now I'm using the word parts. What does Fusion use? Fusion uses the word component. And in a sense, when it's all together, this is one component of the entire drill grinder unit, right? So you have to think about how you would want to break that down. And so we've isolated the drill holder part as a component from the drill grinder. So we're not even going to talk about the grinder. We'll just talk about this. But this has many components, right? It has this little, the drill rest itself. That's a component. This stop is a component. This pivot pin is a component. The clamping piece here is a component. This alignment head, whatever, I don't remember what they really call this, but this is a component, and it has components to it. So that is what rule number one is about, is how are you going to structure this? So you can make all this in one model drawing. You can draw all this together, and it's just that they would all be separate components in that drawing. And so when you make your model drawing, you would start, you could actually say, oh, well, we know we're going to have a rest, a stop, a pivot, and a head, and a clamp. And you could make those components right off the bat in your model drawing and list them as separate components. Then I could go to the rest one, let's say, or maybe even better off, I would start with the rod, just a square rod as a separate component, and I would draw that rod, model that rod first. And this is a pretty simple thing, and it's pressed in here with a round end to it. But so I would model that. That would be, because these. So I'd model this first, and then these other ones fit on there, right? So those would be easy to model because of the base I'm starting at. I'm starting at the rod, and I'm building it up because everything is attached to this rod. So that would be a good first thing to model. And then I could model the end piece on there as a separate component. And it would have several parts to it, or it could have separate components to it. See? So I would model this part, right, this casting part, and then within that component I could have more components. And then this part here would be a component modeled in this component. And then these two components would be modeled under this component. So they're all grouped together as the drill stop. Okay? And then the rest would be the same way. This would be the rest component. And within that rest component, I would have a thumb screw, a set screw, a threaded rod, or you might even model that as one piece, and the actual rest itself. I don't know if you're understanding the structure here. This is kind of like how files are organized in your computer with directories or folders, and then files or folders under folders type of thing. That's exactly how it is. And then this here, of course, the pivot would be a component where you'd have the casting, and then maybe the pivot pin as another component. The same with its fastener. And then we'd get over here, we'd have your a clamping piece, and that would be the clamp and the pin, or the clamp and maybe the rod, or it all matters how you'd want to organize that. But it all could be under the holder as one component. And then these are all separate components under it. So now you have a structure of your model, your model drawing you've made, where you have all your components listed, you've listed, and then the parts to each component under that, under each one. And now, if I'm the second person in line, or the third designer in line, and all my responsibility was this part, I knew right where to go in that model, and I could model that, and everyone else knows where that is. And I could come back a month later and go, oh, I need to change this part here. It's too short or something. And I could then take that, and I know right where it's at in the model, and I could go to it real easily, find it, and change the specifications on it. So basically that's what rule number one is about. People seem to make a really big deal about this, but it's really very simple. Now, if you follow this in your shop, in a home shop, this really is the proper way to do it. And if I was just going to sit down and say, oh, I have to make this one part, no, I wouldn't follow rule number one. I'd just draw it up real fast and I'd make it. If I was going to draw all the parts to it, yeah, I would probably follow rule number one. And I'd draw this part, and then these would be components to it, just to keep it neat and clean. But I don't have to necessarily. And but that's what rule number one is the organization of how your drawing is to the relationship of how hopefully the component is being built or how the component is being put together. It's just a good way to think about it visually. Of course, if you're in the designing of something where you don't have anything to start with, other than maybe that square rod, and you had to redesign the whole thing, you might not know that, oh, this is what I need. I need to have a pivot pin on there, and things like that. But if you had initially started with the rod, and then each one, then we came up with, we have to have a stop. Well, we made that a separate component, and we did that breakdown of the components. It would be easy for us to complete this whole assembly and design the whole assembly with that structure in mind. It would make it much easier to follow of how it was built for the next person. So somebody 10 years from now could pull up that model and go, oh yeah, this is how we built that, and we're going to change this, and it'd be easy to find. Now let's go back to the computer, and real quick, and we'll talk a little bit about how you actually do that on the computer. All right, so I hope that practical demonstration was a little bit better as far as give you a little better understanding of what we're talking about. So we're going to go here to a new. Here we'll start off here with a new drawing, a blank one, and this is what we're talking about as far as rule number one. So I have something to design, and let's say it's a yo-yo. For fun sake, someone's giving you a task, or you want to make one for your kid or something, but you got to have something in mind. You're just not going to have a blank piece of paper and stare at it, right? So the yo-yo, it has basically three components. It's got two sides and a shaft and a string, 4 components, and you start off with right here, over here on your left hand side, and you have the fisheye. It says active component. So it's a given when you start with a drawing, you have one component. It's just called unsaved. So what I like to do is I just save it right away, and I give it a title, right? Yo-yo. And now I have my yo-yo in a file name, version 1 up there. But that's the whole yo-yo, right? And then you'll right click on that and say new component. And then we could rename the component. It's a slow double click, right? And we'll call it side. Or you could call it sides. Let's call it sides. And then we know we have another component, and so we'll right click up there again and say new component, selecting it, right there. We'll call it shaft. Enter. Now under this one, we can click that and open it up, and you can make it the active component with the fisheye, and I could add, let's say, side 2. So we'd have the 2 sides, right? You might have different designs on it, so you'd have 2 sides, and we'll say new component. New component, we'll call it side 1, right? And we can click on that again up here, make it back to active component, and right click and new component, and we'd have side 2. It would help if I spelled it right. There. And we're building that structure of our components, of how we're going to build it, and setting up that structure right off the beginning makes it very easy for you. Now you will have to remember to make sure to capture the history of each one. You want to make sure you have the active component selected. Okay, and as we go along, we will select each one of these. Let's just start with the shaft. Okay, make it easy. Then we'd go up here with a sketch, create sketch, let's say, and we'll select this one. We'll do a simple shaft, C, circle, 0.25, stop sketch, do a press pull on that, and we'll make it, there'll be 0.75, let's say, a small shaft. And that gives us something to work off of. So there's our shafts. If you go under shaft, you'll now have a body, and you'll have the sketch for that shaft. And down here, you'll have the history for it. And that's what you'd want to have, right? If you had to come back and redesign this for some reason. Now we'll go up here to sides. Let's do side 1, and we'll select side 1, but we don't see the shaft anymore. What happened to it, right? And what it did is that's the active component, so it made it, you'll see 2 circles. It's right here, it's really faint. If we uncolorize, it's still going to be really faint, but we'll see, it's still there. Yeah, that's what it, if you don't know, that's what it will do when you select an active component. So there's the component, right? And then when you change components, the active one is the one that will be darker than the rest. It will make all the rest light. So there, in this case, with the light background, it's very hard to see. We'll go down here, change our environment to Tranquility Blue. There we go. With the blue, you'll see it a little better. Now we'll draw our side. So we of course start with a sketch, and let's just, well, here we'll just start on this end, right? And we could select that face or this. They're both the same. All right, so let's just draw a circle for a side. Let's build a side. 2 inches in diameter sounds good. Actually, yo-yos are a little bigger than that, I think. 2.5. Stop sketch, and we could then do an extrude on that, right? Or press pull. And let's do something, a little detail. Let's fillet, put a fillet on this, and here, make it look a little better. 0.375. That looks pretty good. And we're going to jump down to side 2. We'll do another sketch. C for circle, right? 2.5. Stop sketch. Press pull. Let's see, we can go. Let's go the other way on this one. Minus 0.375. Oh, I forgot to select the center. There we go. Add that in there. Let's press pull this side out. Let's come out with this one. 0.125. Make it so it's a half an inch. And we'll fillet this edge so they're symmetrical. There we go. There we just threw a yo-yo and kind of a big gap, but that's okay. But let's say like I said, we wanted to have the different sides maybe a little different. So let's put something on here. There, we embossed a little logo on the one side, and then we could go back here to our component, our top level component, the whole yo-yo, and we have a yo-yo, right? But our structure is what we're talking about, rule number one, and we have our main, which is the entire yo-yo component. Then we have our sides, and there's side one and side two, since we have two different sides. And then we have our shaft, and it's easy to find. Let's say the shaft is too long. We'll double click on shaft, and oops, not the sketch. We can select our shaft as our component. Go back here, edit that, and let's say it needs to be 1/2 inch. And now we have a nice tight gap on our shaft, but you can also see how it's extending into our unit, but that's okay. But the demonstration of components within components, and the components within the whole assembly. So that's basically what rule number one is about, is maintaining a structure. Get the structure set early, especially when you're going to have multiple parts. Because if you're just going to start with a single unit, one part, that you don't need to do that. Just name your part, save it as a named part, and just go for it. It really, rule number one doesn't have much to do with it. Now, if you're going to make and use that part in other parts, make it a component right away. Where you have an assembly, you want to have that as a component, because when you bring a part into this assembly from somewhere else, it will turn it into a component anyway. So start off with it as a component, and then bring it in here to make an assembly. When you're doing something, start off the beginning, make it a component, and so you could drop it into a assembly type model, and because it will turn it into a component already. This is a component, and then they're down here and such. Now, yeah, should have all the sketches there. Yep. Anyway, that is rule number one: is structure of your modeling. And if you follow through with this, like I said, it will be much easier to share and much easier for someone else to understand what's going on, even yourself, when you have to come back to it in a week or so, or 2 weeks. In this case, for me, this has been over a month, maybe 2 months of working on this sort of thing. So thank you, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.